When people at Notre Dame want to hang out, chill out, or geek out, they go to the Quad.
When they want to play, pray, or just get away, they go to the Quad.
The Quad's a place to talk about important ideas with good friends.
And that's what we do here on the Pod Quad Show. We're two Holy Cross priests and friends having curiosity conversations with interesting people. Talking about life.
Welcome back, Pod Quad Nation. We're so excited to be here. So excited to have you along. Thank you very much for joining us. And we are very excited today. We're talking a lot about law today. All right. So, Pete, what is your favorite law show? Were you a Law and Order guy? Do you do any of those shows?
Okay, so I'm going to do a throwback.
All right.
Matlock.
Matlock.
Yeah, Matlock.
Oh,
Yeah.
That's such a good call.
Yeah, it's way back in the day,
Yeah.
but that's what we would watch growing up. So yeah, Matlock.
Yeah, I remember watching L.A. Law. That kind of dates me. But I think that was the 90s. We watched that. And of course, you can't turn on television and not see an episode of Law and Order, right?
Yeah. Dun dun.
Can you do that? Are we going to get sued?
I don't know, man. I don't know.
Well, our moms are the only ones watching
really,
the show
that's
anyway,
accurate. True. So the what attracts you to a good law show is the question.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the really creative courtroom scene. Right?
Yeah.
Where they get, they build the arguments and they blah 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 blah, and then all of a sudden, they drive it home at the end.
Yeah.
Few Good Men. I mean, the courtroom scene, amazing. My cousin,
You can't handle the truth.
my cousin Vinny, of course. I mean, those are incredible.
Anything by John Grisham?
Yeah, I'm not as much
Like the Lincoln Lawyer?
I don't. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't know those. Okay, yeah, that's great. Well,
that's a
John
book,
Grisham
not a
is no, they turned into books.
Is it
books
into
turned
movie?
into movies.
I didn't see that one.
Anyways, we are far afield.
Here we go. So we're so excited to welcome our guest this week. This is Dean Cole, the Dean of our Notre Dame Law School, and we're going to have a great conversation with him.
What's up, everybody? Father Pete McCormick and Father Nate, we're back, but this time we are joined with Dean Marcus Cole. Dean Cole, welcome to the Pod Quad.
Thank you both for having me.
It's so good to have you here, and as is our custom on the Pod Quad, we do a formal introduction first before the actual questions. And so without further ado, here we go. Dean G. Marcus Cole is the Joseph A. Matson Dean and Professor of Law at Notre Dame Law School, an expert in the areas of bankruptcy. I could use some help there. Corporate reorganization and venture capital. Dean Cole is renowned for his interdisciplinary approach to law, economics, and business. Prior to joining Notre Dame, he served as a professor at Stanford Law School for 2 decades. His leadership at Notre Dame has been marked by a commitment to fostering a vibrant academic community grounded in the Catholic intellectual tradition, while also preparing students to be ethical leaders in law and society. Dean Cole, welcome to the Pod Quad.
Thank you both for having me here.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And we're really excited to hear about your life and about your career. So, but just starting with your career in law, what drew you to law in the first place, and what drew you to teach about law?
So it depends on how far you want to go back. So I grew up in the Terrace Village housing projects in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And the thing that really bothered me most from those memories was that my mom had to get on a bus to go grocery shopping. There were no stores in our neighborhood. And as I got older, I was told that the reason why there are no stores is because it's too expensive for shopkeepers to maintain stores in dangerous neighborhood and low-income neighborhood like the one we lived in. And so the more I learned, the more I felt that I could become a business lawyer and help small businesses operate at the margins in communities like the one I grew up in. And so I was determined since I was very young to become a business lawyer. And I went to high school thinking that I needed to prepare myself for becoming a business lawyer. So that was my objective, my goal. And I went to law school. I wrote my law school application essays about being an inner city business lawyer. That's what I wanted to be. That's what I wanted to study. And so that's what drew me to go to law school.
And then how about teaching? Like what has drawn you to teach about law?
So when I got to law school, I was like a starving man coming out of the desert. I just thought it was just the most intellectually rich environment I had ever been immersed in, and I couldn't get enough of law school and legal education and training. I remember I sat in the front row of every class, and I tell my students today that when I was in law school, I would have sat in the professor's lap if I could have gotten any closer, if I could have gotten any closer to the instruction, because I was just so into it. And one day I was sitting in the front row of class. I'll never forget. I always sat in the front row on the left side of the classroom, and my contracts professor came in to the class, and he was a scary guy. His name is Randy Barnett, and he walked into the classroom. He put his lecture notes in his book down on the podium, and opened it up, and he was about to get ready to lecture, and then he closed it, and then walked over to where I was sitting in the front row and leaned over and said, "I want to speak to you after class. So come to my office."
Oh my God.
I was
Through the whole class, you had to have that in the back of your mind?
exactly. I didn't hear a thing he said for the rest of that class.
That is brutal.
So I was terrified. I tried to just go through my mind. What is it that I could have done that they got me in trouble? So I went to his office after class, and I literally knocked on the door. He said, "Come in." I walked in. I said, "Professor Barnett, I don't know what it is I did, but I can make it right." And he said, No, you're not in trouble. He said, "I've been listening to you. I've been hearing your answers in class. I've been hearing your dialogue with other students." And he said, "I want you to think about the possibility of becoming a law professor."
Wow.
And
Wow.
and then a few weeks later, I had another professor come up to me and say the same thing. Mark Grady, Professor Barnett went on to Georgetown Law School, and Mark Grady went on to become the dean at George Mason Law School. And then I had it happen again and again. So 4 of my professors told me that I should think about a career in teaching law, and I told them. And in fact, Professor Barnett, who's still a friend and mentor to me today, he loves going around telling people my reaction. He says, when I mentioned to Marcus Cole that he should think about becoming a law professor, the first words out of his mouth were, "That's ridiculous." And then I realized I just told someone who's dedicated their life to this profession that being a law professor is ridiculous. So then I cleaned it up. I said, it might be good for really smart people like you, but not for me. But I was really determined to become a business lawyer. And so I said, thanks, but no thanks. And so I left law school. I clerked. Actually, all of these professors who were recommending me to become a law professor helped me get my first federal clerkship. I didn't even know what a clerkship was. I'd never thought about doing it, but they all said to me, "You got to do it. You're going to be a law professor. You need to do a clerkship." And so they arranged for me to have an interview with Judge Morris Shepard Arnold of the United States Court of Appeals for the Eighth Circuit. And so he called me to schedule time for me to come down to Little Rock, Arkansas, where his chambers were, to interview for the job. And as we were just going to schedule the interview, and as we were talking, a 15-minute scheduling conversation turned into an hour and a half telephone call.
Wow.
And at the end of the telephone call, he said, "I don't need you to come down here. I'm going to offer you the job right now."
That's awesome.
So I went, and that was, if law school was a cornucopia of an intellectual feast, being a law clerk was even better. It was really truly intellectual gluttony. It was the one of the greatest educational experiences I've ever had. And he was Judge Arnold was a former law professor at University of Pennsylvania, and he's a former dean at the Indiana University School of Law down in Bloomington. And he was just an amazing teacher. I'm still in touch with him today. I've had him up here to judge our moot court. But that 1 year of clerking was like a postdoc for me, and it really solidified everything I learned in law school. But I was still determined to be a business lawyer, so I went into practice. I practiced at Mayer Brown and Platt in Chicago, and the more I practiced, I did a whole bunch of stuff. I did complex commercial litigation, which was basically a fancy way of saying I was a litigator for large companies involving really complex cases, some of the largest lawsuits in the history of the world.
Wow.
I was on the litigation team for that. But I also did some bankruptcy work because when I was clerking for Judge Arnold on the Eighth Circuit, actually my first day clerking for him, I walked into the office and he handed me a file. And he said to me, Marcus, I want you to take a look at this case and see what you can do with it. My previous clerk tried to work it out but couldn't come up with a solution. And so I want to see what you can do with it. So I took this file, and basically a law clerk's job is to draft a draft opinion for the judge. The judge might like it or dislike it, might rewrite it, might toss it out. So I drafted this opinion. I did the research and everything on it. What I was terrified to tell him, though, was that I had never taken a bankruptcy course in law school. So I had to learn bankruptcy on the first day of clerking. So I spent about a week researching bankruptcy law. And it's a good thing I had never had a bankruptcy course, because bankruptcy law makes absolutely no sense if you understand anything about law.
Yeah.
Because bankruptcy is contrary to everything that every fiber of your being about what law and justice is. Bankruptcy has nothing to do with it. So if you have studied bankruptcy law, you might have a tendency to understand what's wrong with a bankruptcy case. I didn't understand bankruptcy law, so I thought that what's going on in this case is screwy and it's unjust and needed to be fixed. So I wrote this opinion for the judge. The judge happened to like it. He was able to get the two other judges on the panel to go along with the opinion, and they issued the opinion. And then about a week or 2 weeks after the opinion was issued, I walk into chambers first thing in the morning. First of all, the judge was waiting for me, and that never happens because I was always into work before he was. But this morning he was waiting for me with a copy of the National Law Journal, and he held it up and he said, "You're famous. You're on the front page of the National Law Journal."
That's
awesome. I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "That opinion you wrote, it is a path-breaking bankruptcy opinion, and it's being recognized everywhere in the country." And I said, "But you said I'm famous. Your name's the one on the opinion." He said, "Well, at least I know you." But anyway, the word got out that I had written this opinion. And so when I got to my law firm in Chicago, I started getting handed bankruptcy work. And I became this bankruptcy expert. This guy who had never taken a class in bankruptcy, all of a sudden I became a bankruptcy expert. And so I got more and more bankruptcy cases in addition to my bankruptcy, my complex commercial litigation cases. What I found, especially with bankruptcy, was that this, law teaches you a set of guiding principles, not just rules, but just guiding principles about justice and how to reconcile it. And a good legal education should show you where to look for the law in addition to what the law is. And the more I worked on these bankruptcy cases, the more frustrated I got, especially with how some of the judges were handling the cases. I just felt like they didn't understand the basic principles of justice that underlied these cases. So I started doing writing on the side. I would write law review articles, basically on some of the issues that I was working on in these cases. And before I even published an article, I had written this article and I'd shown it to some colleagues. I got a call from Marquette University Law School, from the dean, asking me if I would come up and present this paper that he had seen.
That's cool.
And so I did. I went up. I asked for afternoon off from my law firm. I went up and presented this paper. And I had good interaction with the faculty at Marquette. And I thought it was a really great interest. I got lots of suggestions on how to change the paper and how to fix things and what some other things I should think about adding. And so I took those suggestions, went back to my office, didn't think a thing about it. I made the changes and corrections on the paper. And then about a week later, I got a call from the dean of Marquette Law School saying, our faculty really liked your presentation and your paper. We'd like to offer you a job. So
just like that.
Yeah. And I'm like I'm practicing law. I'm not thinking about being a law professor, even though I had all these law professors. So I called up those law professors, Randy Barnett and Mark Grady and some of the others, and Dave Van Zant. And I said, what do you think? They're offering me a job as a law professor. You guys said I should be a law professor. What should I do? And they said to me, you know what? If they're offering you a job right now, it's because they don't think they can get you when you're on the open market. Wow. So you should just wait and get some more practice experience. Wow. Get some more training under your belt, and then decide what you want to do. He said, if they're offering you a job now, they'll offer you a job in a couple of years. And so that's what I did. I just kept working. I was still determined to be a business lawyer. But they persuaded me that I could probably do more good for the communities that I cared about if I went into law teaching and became a law professor rather than to go directly and become a business lawyer for small inner city businesses. And so a couple years after the Marquette offer, I put my hat in the ring in the job market. There's a process called the AALS. The ALS has this system where everybody has to put their resume in and their papers and things like that. And I got a tremendous response. I think I had something like 25 schools interviewing me, and I wound up with like 16 job offers from the process. And the very last one was from Stanford. And actually, I had gotten an offer from Northwestern where I went to law school, and I got an offer from the University of Pennsylvania as well. And I was trying to decide between Pennsylvania and Northwestern when I got a call from Stanford, and my wife said, "Well, we're not going out there." And I said, "Well, the worst that could happen is we get like a little 3-day vacation in California. So let's just go try it out." So I went out to Stanford. I presented my paper there. And my wife wasn't there yet. She was going to join me for a weekend in San Francisco. And I got to the airport, and what she said to me was, she said, "I've never seen you look more terrified in your whole life. What's wrong?" and I said to her, "I think I might get this job." Oh, wow. That's what was scary to me. And so I took it, and I really enjoyed teaching at Stanford. I love California. I love living there. Most of my research was on small businesses, startup companies, and business failure, which had become now my focus because of practice. And there's lots of business failure in Silicon Valley, so I was in the natural place for me. So I just loved it. But my wife will tell you that we traveled back here a lot, back to the Midwest where her family was, back to Notre Dame for football games.
Nice.
I was, my whole childhood I was a Notre Dame football fan, And so I would drag her to this campus on weekends the whole time we were out there. But I loved my colleagues at Stanford. I loved teaching at Stanford. I loved my students. I loved the connections I made in Silicon Valley there. And so I really felt like God put me in a place where he could have me flourish. And I don't think I would be here if I hadn't had that experience.
You know, there's a lot of people who compare weather in Palo Alto to South Bend. It's quite common. You know,
Do they?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I've heard it said that with climate change, South Bend is the new San Diego.
Okay. Well, I guess there's got to be some benefits. Well, maybe the next question for you. You now find yourself here in South Bend, dean of the law school. If you were to describe to a kind of a casual observer walking up to you, what type of lawyer are you hoping to educate and send out into the world? What does that look like?
Yeah. So my goal, when I get up every morning, I am committed to producing lawyers who are going to be leaders in our society, not just people who are going to go in, punch the clock, do the best they can for their clients, and then go home at the end of the day. That's not good enough for a Notre Dame lawyer. I believe that this place has a special mission, that we as educators here have a special vocation to help them to see law as a vocation in and of itself. People refer to law as a service business, but I believe that Notre Dame lawyers should think of it as an even higher purpose, as in service to God's kingdom. And there's a lot that we can do as lawyers that others can't. I tell my students that the ability to practice law, the legal training that we give you, literally gives you superpowers, because they're powers that the average citizen doesn't have.
That's right.
And you can affect really big change in the world through the practice of law, and that they should see it that way, and they should see themselves as an instrument for miracles, for God's miracles. You know, my wife used to say to my kids, when we would pray every day before sending them off to school, but after our prayer, my wife would tap them on the head and say, "Go be someone's miracle today."
That's beautiful.
Because we would always tell them, you know, God is still in the miracle business, but sometimes he wants us to be the instrument of the miracle. He wants us to be the mechanism through which he works a miracle in someone else's life. And so I tell my students that they can be someone's miracle. They can prevent a plant from closing. They can stop job losses. They can put together deals that are going to create communities and housing and companies that are employ and feed families, and they're working a miracle for somebody when they process a patent application on behalf of a pharmaceutical company for a new drug that's going to treat somebody who was untreatable before that. They're working a miracle for somebody, and they should view their vocation as one of service, not just to individual clients or even communities or companies, but also in service to God's kingdom, because that's what we can do. And that's what I want our students to think about with regard to what we're doing at Notre Dame Law School.
Amen. That is awesome. And I love this idea too of just kind of as your website talks about a different kind of lawyer, like Notre Dame, you know, educating a different kind of lawyer. And I think that makes a lot of sense of that philosophy. When you're thinking about that, who might embody that, does any particular student or story come to mind of, you know, somebody who really lives out that different kind of lawyer mentality?
Yeah, so I every orientation I give our students a list of stories actually of examples of Notre Dame lawyers. So the first one, and probably the nearest and dearest to my heart, is Dave Link. Dave Link graduated from Notre Dame Law School in 1961. He went on to practice tax law at Winston & Strawn in Chicago, one of the most prestigious law firms in the world, and made partner at Winston & Strawn, very good tax practice. But in 1970, he decided to hang up the the tax practice and come back to Notre Dame to teach tax, to give back to the law school that gave him an opportunity. And so he taught tax here for 4 years, and then Father Hesburgh tapped him on the shoulder and said, I need a dean, and I want it to be you. And so he then took on the role as dean of Notre Dame Law School and served in that role for 24 years, the longest serving. At one time, he was the longest serving dean in the history of the United States. There's been a couple of people who've surpassed him since then. But he was there for 24 years, and he stepped down when his wife Barbara fell ill with cancer. And when she passed, he stepped down to help care for her toward the end of her life. And then when she passed away, he reflected on what he was to do with the rest of his life. And his wife Barbara, before she passed, and Father Hesburgh, after she passed, both said the same thing. They said that, your work has always been about justice, and you should think about serving prisoners. And he thought about that. And Father Hesburgh also said, you should become a priest. And he said, I can't become a priest. I was married and have kids. And he said, yeah, you can become a priest. You can't become a Holy Cross priest, but you can become a priest. And so he looked around for a seminary that would take him at his age, and he found one in Wisconsin, and he went to seminary and became a priest. And when he was ordained, his bishop appointed him to a ministry of serving the prisoners of the 7 prisons here in northern Indiana. And so he spent the remainder of his life serving prisoners in those prisons. And he had tried to recruit me back in 1997 when I was on the teaching market. Notre Dame was one of the schools that made me an offer back then. And he told me back then, he said, you're Catholic, you belong at Notre Dame. And I have a bunch of funny stories about that experience as well. But when I came back to be dean, he was in the hallway, and I saw him. He said, I told you you'd be back here. And I'd been in touch with him over the years because he was sort of a mentor to me and had always looked out for me. But I remember I saw him in the hallway, and I said, well, can we schedule lunch sometime? And he said, okay, just let's look for a time. So I threw out several dates, and he said, no, I'm busy. And I threw out some more dates, and he said, no, I'm busy. And I just started to get frustrated. I said, Father Dave, all right, let's have lunch on Saturday or Sunday. He said, I can't this Saturday or Sunday. I said, Father Dave, you're busy 7 days a week? He said, yeah, I go to the prison 7 days a week. He said, they don't get a day off, so I'm not taking a day off.
Wow.
And that's how he viewed his vocation as a different kind of lawyer. He saw himself as uniquely equipped to go and give of himself and give of God to these men who were behind bars. That's just one example. Another example is Judge Ann Claire Williams, who is currently on our board of trustees here, but she was the first African-American woman to come to Notre Dame Law School. She graduated in class in 1974. And when she was coming out, she told me that Father Dave helped her get a job. She couldn't find a job. So Father Dave made some phone calls for her and got her a job as a prosecutor in Chicago. And she just worked really diligently, and other people started to take notice. They tried to stick her in places where, she wouldn't be seen or heard from. But she insisted on taking the tough work and doing the tough work. And eventually she got so noticed that when an opening occurred on the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Illinois, President Carter appointed her to that seat, and she served in that capacity until later on President Clinton elevated her to the United States Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit. So she was the first African American woman at Notre Dame Law School. She was the first African-American woman on the U.S. District Court for Northern District of Illinois, and the first African-American woman on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit. And she was committed to being a good judge. She then stepped down from there to serve on several international tribunals in Europe. And then when she retired from that, she volunteered to go to Africa to teach the judges and the lawyers there how to deal with domestic violence issues. And so she's basically created an entire army of lawyers across Africa who are protecting the rights of women.
Wow.
It's amazing.
And that's not something that just anybody does. She basically, from her own resources and on her own initiative, decided that I can make a difference in the lives of women who are less fortunate than me. And she went to Africa and did this. So, I mean, she's another example. Another example, if you want more examples, I've got more.
I think you should write a book. I'm looking forward to the book.
I might do that. I
should.
profiles in a different kind of lawyer. I might do that. Yeah.
You know, I want to pivot a little bit, but stay on the same theme here of talking about stories, and in this particular instance, your own. You wrote an article at the death of George Floyd about the racial inequities and the realities of such, but then you finished by saying, I have air in my lungs. I can breathe.
Yeah.
And as a result, these are the types of things that I'm going to commit myself to.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about how the impetus behind that article, and then also how you've lived it over the course of these past several years?
Yeah. So, like everybody else in this country, I was shocked at the video of George Floyd being murdered on the streets of Minneapolis. And over the next few days after the murder, I heard a lot of talk about whether or not he deserved it, right? Whether or not he was the kind of person who had it coming. And I heard this for a couple of days, and I thought to myself, you know what? I need to say something about this, because that could have been, it literally could have been me, or it could have been one of my sons. And I think people need to know that in this country, you don't have to do something wrong to be attacked by the police. And I gave them examples from my own life. I talked about how my father was beaten nearly to death in the street in front of me and my sister and my little brother when I was probably 6 years old at the time, maybe younger. My sister would have been 5, and my little brother would have been 3 or 2. And we watched him beaten to a bloody pulp, to where his blood was all over the windshield of our car by some guys from a different neighborhood. And the only people, we lived in a Jewish neighborhood in Pittsburgh at the time. And if it wasn't for our neighbors to come out of their houses to chase those guys away, my father would have died that night. And we got no help from the police. We got no help from anyone but our neighbors. And then years later, I tell the story in the article about how I was pulled over by a police officer, and I had done nothing wrong that I can even think of. And to this day, I still don't know why he pulled me over, but it was very clear when he pulled me over, he was very agitated. And I had my 2 kids in car seats in the back seat. And they watched as this guy beat me on the fender of my car, and then just left. And basically humiliated me in front of my children, and I could do nothing in return. And so I thought I had to tell that story because there were so many people who were completely in disbelief that police officers would do anything like this, like what they did to George Floyd, unless he had done something to deserve it. And, you know, I was a law professor at Stanford University when I got beaten by a cop. So you can do everything right. You can be accomplished and everything else. But at the end of the day, your accomplishments, your good behavior does nothing for you if somebody has the intention to do you harm for no other reason than the color of your skin. And so I thought I had to write that article to say something like that. But I also was determined to say something more, because a lot of the dialogue in this country, when something like that incident with George Floyd happens, is adversarial. It's antagonistic. It's us against them. And what I thought was that we need to break that. We need to break that cycle of pointing fingers at each other, and instead think about what it is each of us can do. You know, it's the whole Catholic social teaching idea of subsidiarity. What is my responsibility to do something to make the world a better place? And so at the end of that essay, I listed 3 things that I was going to focus on to do to try to make the world a better place. And then I challenged anyone reading the article to do 3 things in their orbit to make the world a better place. Instead of pointing fingers and saying cops are bad, because not all cops are bad, but even 1 or 2 bad cops can make life-ending decisions for someone and make life miserable for others. So what are we going to do? And so I took my responsibility as a citizen to say the 3 things that I'm going to do. And I challenged others to think of 3 things, not point fingers, not argue, not make accusations, but instead just identify 3 things that you can do to make the world a better place. And I actually just wrote that piece for my students, because I wanted them to think about some of the conversations they were having about blameworthiness, the blameworthiness of George Floyd. And the article went viral from there. And I've heard from, it went all over the United States. And then I've heard I've gotten emails and letters from people in Australia and from people in Germany, people in Africa, South America have sent me the 3 things. I never asked them to tell me the 3 things, but people sent me the 3 things that they were going to do. And that was the most moving thing to me, was that people really care and they want to do 3 things.
That's awesome. Well, speaking of your kind of global impact, you've lived all over the place, from Amsterdam to China to Stanford, and all over the place. And places have a way of sort of shaping us. How has Notre Dame shaped you as a person?
Oh, this is the most unexpected and amazing experience of my life. I came to Notre Dame because I'm Catholic. I felt in California like a missionary, because and quite frankly, I was a missionary in California, because California is a very secular place.
Yep.
Stanford's a very secular place, and every day that you encounter somebody with your faith, you're basically explaining first principles to them, because a lot of people just never encountered Jesus before, and I wanted the experience of being able to go to Mass every day if I wanted to, or being able to be here and celebrate the Eucharist and be in communion with other Catholics. And that was the big draw for me. In fact, my wife Angie will tell you that when I got the call from Notre Dame, we didn't even discuss it. She knew that this was it for me, and she knew that I always talk about people having a God-sized hole in their heart. I already had God in that hole, but I also had a Notre Dame-sized hole in my heart, and so. Both Angie and I think our kids would also say that this place has really helped us to grow in our faith in ways that we never expected. It's helped us to see God's purpose in our life. I literally cannot believe how God has used me to affect change, and I just never thought myself capable of the things that God has made possible since I came here, and it has completely transformed my life. I think about my son Constantine too, who went here as an undergraduate after I'd come here. And in fact, I had to talk him into even applying here because he went to a Jesuit school in California, and the Jesuits make you take your list of college applications home to your parents and have them sign the list to make sure that they have buy-in on the list. So he brings me this list, and there's 8 or 9 schools on this list, and I said, Constantine, there's isn't there a glaring omission on this list? And he said, Dad, that Notre Dame place, you've been gassing that place up your whole life. And I said, well, you ought to, and by the way, this is before he knew that I was coming here. So he had no idea I was coming here. I said, you ought to at least just keep an open mind, go take a tour. And so he said, a tour? I said, yeah, take a tour. He said, you think you could arrange something like that for me? I said, I might know some people. So he comes on a tour, and this place just sold him. I mean, he was just completely sold. And the thing that he loved most, which he says later, was the dormitory system. He said that is the most unique characteristic of this place. Now, this kid, he's now a half a year out of Notre Dame, but this probably happened about 2 years ago. First of all, we didn't see him his whole first 2 years here. He wanted to have a normal Notre Dame experience. Nice. But about 2 years ago, we invited him over to the house for dinner on Sunday, and I made his favorite meal, and then he abruptly gets up from dinner about to leave. And I said, where are you going? He said, I got to get back to campus. I said, why? He said, because I want to make it to Mass. And I said, wait a second. I turned to Angie. I said, isn't this the kid we had to grab him by the ear and drag him to Mass his entire childhood? And now he doesn't want to leave. He wants to leave home because he needs to get to Mass. I went to visit him the other day in Chicago, and he proudly showed me, because he just moved to Chicago, was teaching in a Jesuit, Chicago Jesuit Academy there. And the first thing he said to me was, I want to show you my church. I want to take you to Mass at my church.
That's cool.
And that is one of the greatest things a parent can hear, is that not only does he want to take you to his church, but he actually made the effort to go find a place to worship. And he was so proud of he wanted to take me to Mass with him. That's so cool. And I'll tell you, that's the best gift I've ever received. So it's really transformed my whole family. Even my son, who didn't go here, was transformed by this place, because he got a job at the Morris Inn, and that persuaded him that the hotel business was for him. And so now he's off on this career. He moved to Miami first for a job at the Fontainebleau Hotel, and now he's in the corporate management training program for Hyatt Hotels.
Wow.
But it was the Morris Inn that sold him on the hotel business, and he's
that's awesome.
So Notre Dame has had a transformative impact on my entire family.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I'll get you this last question, and there's a tradition that we have here on the Pod Quad, which is and you've already given us so much good counsel and wisdom, but I'm going to go back to the well one more time.
Sure.
Is there a piece of advice that you have lived by, that you've been given, or that you'd like to offer to those who are listening or watching today?
Yeah, I think first of all, thank you guys for having me here.
Yeah,
I really appreciate this opportunity. And I don't think I'm the wisest person. I actually think my wife is the wisest person I've ever met. But the piece of advice that I would leave, especially students, young people today, is a piece of advice I had gotten from my judge, Judge Morris Shepard Arnold on the 8th Circuit. I remember it was probably December or January of the year that I was clerking there in Arkansas, and we got this really wicked ice storm, and it shut down everything. It shut down the highway. It shut down the entire place. But I had a job. And so by hook or by crook, I was going to go into work, and I got into work. I was a little bit late, and then the judge showed up, and so I let him into the chambers, and I was the only one there. Mm-hmm. And he asked me where everybody else was, and I said, "Well, Judge, look at it outside. Nobody can get here." He said, "But you got here." And I said, "Yeah, Judge, that's because I got work to do and I got to get it done." He said, "Marcus, you're already living the best advice I could give you, which is that the most important thing in life is to just show up.
Huh.
Because once you do that, you can actually get stuff done. But most people don't do even that one thing. You show up for work. You show up for other people. You show up for your family. You show up for your God. You show up, and good things will happen for you." And young people today put so much stress on themselves about being perfect, but there are some days you can't be perfect.
Yeah. Nope.
But there are days you can just show up, and sometimes that's going to be good enough. And so that's the best advice I would give to a young person today is to, whatever you do, just show up. And sometimes just being there is going to be good enough to get the job done.
Dean Cole, thank you. Thank you so much.
Dean Marcus Cole, thank you so much for joining us here on the Pod Quad.
Thank you so
Grateful
much.
for the conversation.
So honored.
Welcome back, and welcome to our Juicebox segment. This is where we share a juice box and talk about what part of that conversation gave us juice. So I'm going to ask you first, Pete, what did you think?
So much. There's any number of directions that can be gone down here.
So much juice.
The story that I really appreciated was about Father Dave Link. Mm-hmm. You know, I had the privilege of meeting him. I'm sure you have at some point as well before he passed. But the way he sought to serve, the way he used his gifts and his talents in service, and in a particular way, that line around, well, I'm in 7 days because the folks that I serve are in 7 days. Yeah. And to be able to really come into alignment with those that you serve, and to really, in whatever way possible, seek to intentionally establish a community. Mm-hmm. To me, it's just awesome and a great reminder for what it means to be a great friend, to be a great minister, to be someone who's just an overall good human.
Yeah. And a person of integrity too, right? Like, I really think that idea of, these are folks who have been involved in law their entire life, right? To have that experience of, advocating for people, but to step into the other side of that, right? Yeah. And really say, I want to be part of a solution for maybe for people who the law has not served in complicated ways, right?
Right.
I mean, his comment about being a miracle, gosh, that was such an amazing thing. But I have to say, the thing that really struck me in a personal way, and I think really gave me juice, is the article that he wrote in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. Because, as you know, I have my uncle, several of my cousins are all police officers in the Twin Cities. They're awesome people. They're amazing public servants. They're people who are really great in serving their communities. And they can get a bad rap because of these bad actors, right? And I had an interesting conversation with my cousin after that happened, where she said, like, "Oh, I get the clergy sex abuse crisis thing in a different way. The way that people can misjudge priests because of some of these bad actors." And I just I appreciate the nuance of his article and the way that he refused to be accusatory, even though he had these really objectively terrible experiences, right? And he refused to do that. He wanted to be proactive. He wanted to invite people to be the change in the world. He wanted to invite people to think about, how can I individually respond? And I believe that's the heart of our baptismal call, right? It doesn't happen in some generic way. It's like, how will you change the world? How will you bring the Lord into your community, your life? Like, what are the three things that I'm going to have to think about that? What are my three things to change the world?
No, it's absolutely right. I mean, the fact is that we live in a broken society. And so the question becomes, what do we do? Do we continue to pile upon that? Or do we say, no, I genuinely hope to be a change, to be a witness, to be a light to the world? And I think we saw a great example in Dean Cole. of demonstrating what that looks like, to be able to stare the reality and to name it as such, but then also to say, look, this is a way forward. This is a way that all of us can go forward, and to be really proud of where we end up.
Well, what an amazing conversation. I'm so filled with gratitude for his stories, for his perspective, that he's here at Notre Dame and invited other people to be part of that mission as well. So thank you very much for joining us, PodQuad Nation. We'll see you on the quad.